I'm pretty passionate about this subject. I can't not. So I spent all of my career, until now actually, in the private sector. I've done 3 startups, spent a ton of time in Silicon Valley working for Cisco while it was growing, literally by tenfold. A couple of thoughts. Think of this as a journey, right? So at the end of your career, you can look back on something. It's that kind of time scale that you're talking about here. Think about building an ecosystem, not businesses. And I think that's the point that Bill was talking about. And I think it's really important. Coming out of college, right? One of my first interviews was with Polaroid, right? And it gets better. I was in an establishment unlike this one after the interview, and they were working me over, and they said, everything else aside, there's one thing that is true, which is there will always be a Polaroid. At which point I realized that I was just in the wrong place in the wrong interview. But point being, look ahead, don't try to replicate the past. Look at the new thing that's happening, and the unimagined thing that's happening.
That's great. So, okay, just so everybody knows, I'm collecting questions. So as you raise your hand, I'm remembering.
Same
next
deal,
week,
right?
Just so everybody knows, I got Nancy, Ken, Christine, Mike. So let's start with Nancy, and I got Harold too. So Nancy, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. And this is just a quick one, and it's a lot more on the ground than these long-term plans that you're talking about. But I'm just curious if you know yet the relative scale of the new building as it compares to the existing building. Because I imagine it's quite a bit smaller footprint, and I'm just wondering if you're it's on your radar, what are you going to do with all that extra ground? Or is there extra ground? I may be making an assumption.
We're getting there. As I said, I think I said earlier, or maybe at a different meeting earlier this meeting, we're building the building from the inside out.
The inside, yeah.
There will be, the footprint, you're right, is smaller, probably half the size of the Mastex building, maybe even less than that. Every time we get more efficient, right, it gets a little bit smaller. And we'll do something, I am very certain that the site will look better when we're done than it does today. How's that?
And it's going to be centered, right? It's going to be centered on, and we think of this long sawtooth mill building, but it's going to be centered essentially in that plot of land.
Yeah, it'll be on the upper canal side of Bigelow Street. Won't be quite centered. In fact, what's driving it is the generator station that you asked about before. We want to make sure that we don't put the building on top of the little tunnels because we prefer not to fall in.
Will there be trees?
There will be trees. Don't ask me how many, but there will be trees.
Okay, next we've got Ken.
Yeah, back on the topic of waste heat, and things like, well, first off, there are low temperature hot water radiators that can use relatively low temperatures, say 120 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. But also, of course, heat pumps that people were using earth temperature of 60, 70 degrees to generate heat. How much more efficient could they be using 100 and 110 degree water to generate that heat if you circulate that around the distance? Of course, that's probably a bit more advanced to take on.
You should think about, yes to your second question, but also think of this as more like 70, 80 degree water, not 100 degree water.
Mike?
Okay. The criteria on the site preparation was set in such a way that no local contractors could qualify to bid on it. You described the center so far where all the people using it are in Boston and Cambridge and places like that. We're taking a piece of land that was revenue producing for the city, and it's now going to a consortium that's not going to pay any taxes. Where's the employment opportunities? Some short-term construction jobs. Long-term, what does this do for Holyoke? What is it going to generate for Holyoke, for jobs, tax revenue, for anything? How many jobs are going to be involved? Where Holyoke is going to participate?
So it's a good question. I was about to say Jeff. let me take it. Let me take it on a couple of fronts. The environment, the specs for the job were driven by the state of Massachusetts and the federal government, right? That there are standards that we need to meet and criteria that we need to set. We couldn't have done it in any other way. I think to your larger point, I think of the center with respect to Holyoke as having perhaps two impacts. One is where in my commercial life I would have called a reference account. We're a large entity locating in the town. When the next place comes, or the next entity comes that is interested in locating here and wondering what it's like, they'll call us and we'll have a story to tell, which I expect will be a very positive one. Certainly my business experience of reference account, especially your first one, is critically important, so I think we can play a role there. I think that in working with the city on preparing this site and making it happen, I think there's some learning that we've done along the way that will make it easier for the next comer to come around. Admittedly, that's an indirect effect, but I think an important one. As universities, we're also pretty good at education. And we were talking about this, I think, this being a long journey for Holyoke. If we think about it in context, there are contributions that I think that we can make to the educational infrastructure over time in Holyoke that will have a long-term and a lasting benefit. You're right, we're not going to bring 1,000 jobs directly to Holyoke. If there are 15 or 20 people working there, that's about where it go, with the exception of the construction project, which is a different animal. I don't know if that helps, but that's the reality of what we're doing.
I might add to this that, so I ran into this project. I was in a meeting in Cambridge. I live in Shelburne Falls. I was in a meeting in Cambridge at Microsoft a couple of years ago, really 2 years ago in March, 2 years ago in February. And I ran into this project in an office building. And my first question to the people who were at MIT was, why Holyoke? Of all the places in Massachusetts, why Holyoke? I mean, how many cities and towns are there in Massachusetts?
351.
351. Why Holyoke? Right? And so the answer is green power and connectivity. That's in relatively short distance back to Cambridge and Boston. So the challenge from an economic development point of view, because we all recognize it's not a lot of jobs, is to build off of that choice that Harvard, MIT, Northeastern BU, and UMass made, and to do things together that can develop business opportunities, related business opportunities. And I don't have any data to back it up, but I would say that between the city and HG&E, the number of inquiries they've had since the consortium picked Holyoke has gone up dramatically. The number of inquiries from the private sector. And I was in a car with Cisco and EMC executives on their first trip here. They'd never been to Holyoke before, and they were really impressed. They were excited. And to me, that was, as a person who lives in Pioneer Valley, that was a big step forward in terms of an interesting corporation. So I don't answer your question, but as an economic development professional, it seems like something we have to take advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, EMC employs 8,000 people, 6,000 people inside the 495 corridor. Is EMC going to employ anybody in Holyoke?
So one story to tell specifically about EMC is that after coming out to Holyoke for the first time and after getting involved in our project, EMC actually went through a process where they stopped a site selection decision on a new data center that they were going to build. And they spent about 3 or 4 weeks, Kathy, looking at the feasibility of doing it in Holyoke. Now, unfortunately, they were too far down the road. But if you so they ended up building a data center on land they already owned in North Carolina. But if you think about the fact that you had this major company, Massachusetts-based, big investment in the state and in the region, stop a process cold in order to investigate an option for doing something in Holyoke, that's a very positive statement with respect to what
Sure, but is
what
that
the future
interest-
opportunity
Is that interest only because they're gonna save millions and millions and millions of dollars on their electric bill?
Who cares?
Perfectly good reason.
Okay, which is great, but it's,
Right. So the
What
difference,
economic impact does that have?
so the difference is between a private sector company doing their data center work and a consortium of universities building a scientific computing center. I think as a public policy strategy, marketing Holyoke to academic and nonprofit institutions to build facilities that aren't going to generate a lot of jobs is probably not a good policy in general. So I don't think you want to go out and attract 5 or 6 more new university-based data centers. But if you can use us as a reference account to get the business data center, to get a corporation to come in and build a facility here where you're not only offering them the power, but you're also offering them the workforce and the talent, that's an opportunity that
And they'll contribute to the tax.
ends up making a lot of sense.
And we've got a lot of questions lined up. I just want to, just briefly, because these guys are talking a little bit more of a global, we've got Kathy Anderson, who's actually been working on the ground trying to figure out how to attract people. Do you just want to speak to this briefly, Kathy, to this
Sure.
question?
Sure, and I think that one thing
Could
that.
you go up front and
Yeah.
speak
Oh,
to
sure.
You gotta speak into the microphone here.
Would you give her the microphone?
So one of the things that both the state and the city and the universities they realized that was going to be the issue. So there's a couple $100,000 initiative going on right now through the Innovation District Task Force and the consultants that have been hired for that to look at what kind of niche markets, incubator businesses that want to be around this and use this as a leverage. Really, it's a leverage for us. They're taking a brownfield site that's vacant and blighted, owes the city taxes. They're beautifying it. I know there's developers that are looking at buildings across the canal from that because they want to be around this. So the urban renewal plan and all the planning initiatives that we're doing are really setting the groundwork so we're ready when they come. We need to look at our fiber optic system, we look at energy, I mean, all those things are positives, and that's why Cisco was looking at Holyoke to do this smart and connected community. There's not very many places around that have the fiber optic infrastructure that we do. So we're working with the schools, we're looking at math and science in the schools to help educate and get kids ready. We're talking with Dean Vocational School and looking at, are we teaching for what the jobs we have today and for the future are? So there's a lot of different layers to this. So it's not just a university coming, paying no taxes and no jobs. It's really a leverager for us. So.
And I think the one comment that I would just add to that is that's really important for the city and the citizens of the city to get ready and to ask what is it that we can do to help create that environment that makes it welcoming for business to come in. And that's one of the things that Crush really wants to take part in. So we're just going to breeze through some more questions here, and raise your hand now so I know, because we've got about 15 more minutes, okay?